Standard 10th Science Part 2, Science 2 subject, Lesson number 2, Life Processes in Living Organisms. In this chapter, in the last video, we have seen details about aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration happens in 3 steps or 3 stages. Glycolysis was the first one we have seen in detail. After glycolysis is completed, acetyl-CoA is formed. That acetyl-CoA molecule enters into the second step of aerobic respiration, that is tricarboxylic acid cycle. The next slide is about tricarboxylic acid cycle. So this is the second step or second stage of aerobic respiration after glycolysis has been completed. So during glycolysis, at the end, acetyl-CoA molecules are formed, 2 molecules. So both the molecules of acetyl-CoA will enter into mitochondria. When they enter into mitochondria, tricarboxylic acid cycle starts. It is the name is at the end they have used the word cycle. That means this process, this various reactions which are in Tca cycle, they are going to repeat again and again and again. Tricarboxylic acid cycle. This is the reason why it is called as cycle. So it takes place inside the mitochondria. What happens to these 2 molecules of acetyl-CoA during these reactions? The acetyl part from this acetyl-CoA, it gets completely oxidized during these reactions, and at the end of Tca cycle, 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, 2 molecules of water and 2 molecules of NADH are formed and 1 molecule of FADH2 are formed at the end of tricarboxylic acid cycle. It takes place inside the mitochondria. In the next slide, there is a diagrammatic representation of tricarboxylic acid cycle or Tca cycle, which is taking place inside the mitochondria. Here in the labeling, you can see that mitochondria has 2 membranes, the outer membrane and the inner membrane. And inside this membrane, whatever is present, it is called as mitochondrial matter. Mitochondrial matter. So here at above on the top you will see that they have one side is pyruvic acid, other side is fatty acid, and both the arrows are pointing inwards. That means pyruvic acid and fatty acid too can enter into the mitochondria to participate into the Tca cycle, depending upon what is the source of energy, depending upon availability. Sometimes if carbohydrate is not available, then in that case fats or fatty acids are considered for energy production. So this is what they are trying to show. Now concentrate little bit inside the mitochondrial matter. You will see the symbol of Tca cycle is cyclical with 2 arrows. That means it keeps on repeating again and again. The cycle. Cycle means the various reactions. The series of reaction keeps on repeating again and again. And at the end, you will see some arrows which are pointing outwards. That means after Tca cycle is completed, what things are formed. So 2 molecules of carbon dioxide, 2 molecules of NADH and 1 molecule of FADH2, 3 molecules of NADH are formed after Tca cycle is completed. Then in the next slide, you will see electron transfer chain. This is the third step or third stage of aerobic respiration. First is glycolysis, second tricarboxylic acid cycle, and third one electron transfer chain. That means whatever are the end products formed in tricarboxylic acid cycle, whatever molecules are formed, NADH2, FADH2, whatever are formed, they will now enter into electron transfer chain. So electron transfer chain, where it will take place? It will take place inside the mitochondria. Only inside the mitochondria, okay? It doesn't take place outside mitochondria. The molecules of NADH2, FADH2 that are formed during the above steps of glycolysis and Tca cycle means the molecules of NADH, FADH2 that are formed in glycolysis and in Tca cycle, they all are going to participate now in the electron transfer chain. And when this process of electron transfer chain takes place, that means process means these are various reactions which will happen one after the another once the NADH and FADH2 enter in this reaction. So what happens is 3 molecules of ATP are formed from every molecule of NADH molecule, NADH2 molecule, and 2 molecules of ATP are formed from 1 molecule of FADH2. Okay. In the next slide, this picture, there is a diagrammatic representation. They are trying to explain you how the ATP molecule is actually made up of and how it gives the energy. So why are we seeing this structure in detail? Because we have studied the aerobic respiration, and what is the main purpose of aerobic respiration inside our body, inside our cell? To give oxygen to our cells, and that oxygen is used to form ATP molecule, that means energy. So digestion process and respiration process are connected, and they together finally give us energy, ATP molecules. So this is how ATP molecule is made up of. See, the full form of ATP molecule is adenosine triphosphate. So you will see here in the diagram there is something called as adenine. This is a nucleotide. And ribose is a sugar. Adenine is a nucleotide, ribose is a sugar. The orange color diagram that you see, pentagonal diagram, orange color, small, that is ribose sugar, and adenine is a nucleotide. So adenine is connected with ribose, and ribose sugar has 3 phosphate groups. See over there, inorganic phosphate group. 3 small p you will see, they are the phosphate groups. So triphosphate, adenosine triphosphate, tri means 3 phosphate groups. Now the energy is actually stored in the bonds of this phosphate group. The 3 phosphate groups are connected by each other by bonds. So these bonds which are present in between them, they have the stored energy. Whenever our cells require energy, the one of the phosphate group which is at the end, it breaks its bond and gives energy, and then after breaking and giving the energy, the ATP will become ADP, adenosine diphosphate. Di means 2 phosphate groups, because one has gone, the bond has been broken from one, and it is released as inorganic phosphate. See at the right side of the diagram, and energy is released. Okay, so every time when a new ATP molecule has to be formed, there is always presence of ADP, adenosine diphosphate. This is already present, ADP is already present, and then the aerobic respiration, all processes will take place, and when it is completed, ATP new molecule will be formed. The next slide is a little bit detail about the ATP molecule. Just now the structure that we have seen about that structure. Now this paragraph from your textbook has been reduced. It's 25% of your syllabus has been reduced, right? So this is from that portion, but purposely I am explaining you because you need to understand the ATP structure. So adenosine, ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate. This is the molecule which actually has energy. So when we say that we get energy from food, we get energy after aerobic respiration, it is not energy means something not that directly comes into picture, but it is the ATP molecule. And these molecules, ATP molecules, are stored in our cells. Whenever we need it, then only energy is being used or molecules are being used. So chemically, if you see the structure, ATP is formed from adenosine ribonucleoside. Okay, that means it is a adenosine, you have seen in the picture, adenosine connected with pentose sugar. So it contains, see this point, it has what things it has, what are the parts of ATP? It contains a nitrogenous base, adenine, pentose sugar, which is ribose. The name of the pentose sugar is ribose. The name of nitrogenous compound is adenine, and three phosphate groups, and energy is actually present in the bonds of these three phosphate groups. So ATP is also called as energy currency of the cell, because whenever the cell needs energy, it uses this ATP molecule. Now we have finished the topic of aerobic respiration completely. We will see now, if in case suppose there is no glucose, there is no carbohydrate available in our body, then what do our cells take energy from? Because if you remember the beginning of glycolysis when it starts, it uses a molecule of glucose. Okay, glycolysis uses a molecule of glucose. So if suppose there is no glucose, then then the cell will use some other nutrients, and those other nutrients are lipids and proteins. Whenever lipids or proteins are used, they are first converted into their simple form or basic unit. So in case of lipids, lipids are first converted to fatty acids, and proteins are first converted into amino acids. So the basic unit, the simplest form, basic unit of lipids is fatty acids, and of proteins are amino acids. Then how this will take place? All three steps will be same: glycolysis, Tca cycle, and electron transfer change. All these are going to take place, but fatty acids and amino acids will first get converted into acetyl CoA, which happens in the first step, that is glycolysis, right? So fatty acids and amino acids are going to get converted into acetyl CoA, and then energy will be obtained, which will take place inside the mitochondria by process of Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle, the word Krebs cycle, so in the last slide we have seen that if carbohydrate or glucose is not available, then lipids and proteins are used for energy production. First, lipids will be converted into fatty acids, proteins to amino acid. They are converted into acetyl CoA, and then energy will be formed. Now, in this diagram that you see, it is giving you a diagrammatic representation of how this aerobic respiration takes place when different nutrients are present. See at the center, suppose the cell is using carbohydrate as a source of energy. Then if it is carbohydrate, it will first get digested or converted into glucose. That glucose will enter into glycolysis. So carbohydrate here means they are talking about glucose. Glucose will enter into glycolysis. Glycolysis is the first step of aerobic respiration. It is a series of reaction. When glycolysis is completed, pyruvic acid is formed, which is converted into acetyl CoA. Then this acetyl CoA enters into Krebs cycle. Krebs cycle means, the word Krebs cycle is used for tricarboxylic acid cycle. Tca cycle is also called as Krebs cycle because the scientist who discovered the Tca cycle, his name was Hans Krebs. So Tca cycle is also called as Krebs cycle. The acetyl CoA molecules will enter into Krebs cycle. When this Krebs cycle and electron transfer chain are completed, then what is formed at the end is carbon dioxide, water molecule and energy. Energy means ATP molecules. Now going back to the top of the diagram, in case if the cell doesn't use carbohydrate, if carbohydrate is not available in our body, then what other sources are there? Either it will be lipids or either proteins. Now lipids and proteins first are digested to their basic form. In case of lipids, lipids are converted to fatty acids and proteins are converted or digested to amino acids. These amino acids and fatty acids will directly get converted into acetyl CoA, and then acetyl CoA will enter into Krebs cycle. So basically what happens is, depending upon what nutrient is available, there are some changes there. What is the change? Only about glycolysis. If glucose is not present, then glycolysis reactions will not happen. Directly acetyl CoA will be available, will be formed if it is proteins or lipids, and then immediately Krebs cycle will start inside the mitochondria and energy, carbon dioxide and water molecules will be formed.